Good. Hey, everybody. This is John Newsom. I'm presenting my presentation from my paper on promoting effective learning and social cultural learning theory. My learning question is: does social cultural learning promote effective learning for underrepresented minority students in public schools? This is a question that has been actually been on my mind for a few courses down the line. So first of all, I'd like to start off with talking about two of the impactful scholars that impacted my presentation on today. The first is PJ, and PJ's purpose of education, from his perspective, was to create capable men who can do new things through exploration and discovery, um, and through interactions and experiences. John Piaget's foundational was the cognitive stages, sensory motor, in which an infant to 2 years old would become aware of the world, and then they move on to the pre-operational stage, in which they start connecting language to objects within their world, and then from there they grow to the concrete uh, operational stage, in which they begin to think logically and use inductive reasoning, and then a formal um, operational stage in which they begin to work and judge based on morals and things like that, and abstract thinking, and begin to use deductive reasoning. Vygotsky, on the other hand, introduced students to cultural tools, and he believed that education, the purpose of education was to teach them how to use those tools so that they could learn and develop, and they would be influenced by culture. Vygotsky's social cultural theory of cognitive development was focused on the social interaction and how it plays a foundational role in cognitive development. And one of his key components was the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development was the measure between the actual development and the potential development that a student could have, and that zone of proximal development could be used to as a tool to educate learners. He also introduced the idea of scaffolding, where he says the knowledgeable other is in place, whether it's a teacher or another student, in place to help um, the learner reach their potential level of development. So, who are underrepresented minority students? Basically, underrepresented minority students are students who are not a part of the dominant culture in a society. Social cultural learning theory, it teaches, it's a Vygotsky, um, it's from Vygotsky's theory, and it's a learning. He teaches that learning is a social process. Learning is communal. In other words, learning deeply happens when other people are around. Um, he also talks about these cultural development and the two pieces of it, of learning and development, interpsychological and intrapsychological. In other words, we learn by interacting with people, and then we internalize it, and then what we internalize, we can then bring back bring back up, and that creates our learning and development. And the zone of proximal development is based on three stages, or three parts, let me say: actual development level, zone of proximal development, and potential development level. The practical implications for social cultural learning theory in classroom is the zone of proximal development, in particularly, gives teachers a starting point for planning and designing instruction. Things such as a pretest gives them information how they know how to design instruction for the learner. Some tools that can be used: whole group instruction, small group instruction, think, pair, share, and some methods: independent practice, guided practice, and team-based learning can all be used to help the learner develop the skills that they need in order to be successful in school. Some issues that impact underrepresented minorities in schools. Steele talks about it in his article, like things like stereotype threat, in which the learner is, you know, fears that negative stereotypes will come to fruition, and this impacts their ability to achieve. So that's one piece. But teacher quality is also a big piece. Goldhaber et al. Talks about how underrepresented minorities are almost twice as likely to get a novice teacher than white students. And also the lack of cultural relevant teaching. In order for individuals to learn, you have to understand who they are. You have to understand their culture in order to basically in order to evaluate them effectively, and in order to teach them, you have to know how they're coming. And a lot of times, I believe that issues of intellect are basically issues of culture, not necessarily issues of intellect. Although a lot of times in America, because the tools that are used to measure intellect are based on maybe one culture's a measure of intelligence, and it creates an issue which is not necessarily an intellectual issue, but a cultural issue. Social cultural learning and cultural relevant teaching. I believe that there's connection there. Um, Teachers and culture, they should you should know the cultures of the students that you are teaching. That's an important piece of it. And Barbara Rogoff's book, she talks about observing, individuals out really knowing the culture. You're not really seeing, or you're not really able to evaluate that culture, because you don't understand the meaning, and you don't understand why that culture does what it does. So you cannot really evaluate that culture. Curriculum becomes a big piece of it. The learning design, how you design the learning, the culture is going to depend on that, and the relationships that you have with students and the knowledge of your students. If you don't know your students deeply, you're not going to be able to teach them at a deep level. So, does social cultural learning promote effective learning for underrepresented minority students in public schools? I believe that social cultural learning promotes effective learning for underrepresented minority students when underrepresented minority students have quality teachers in their classroom. And we understand from Goldhaber's article that that there is an issue there with quality teachers on all, looking at all aspects, all components of teacher quality. Uh, African American students in that article, African American students normally get the short end of the stick in that particular article. Educators must understand culture deeply in order to educate students. Teachers understand the educational needs of their students. When they understand the culture of their students, when they interact with their students, when they look at their students not as empty vessels, but as bringing something to the table, bringing their culture to the table. And when we have that, we understand that underrepresented students can um, can learn deeply in public schools. And lastly, we need tools such as effective evaluation tools in order to help in order to help improve instruction, and not just to make professional decisions. Oftentimes, it's used to see what teachers are going to be kept, or what teachers are going to get a raise, or how much raise they're going to get, or what score they get. But it's not used to improve instruction. So having a tool that's effective in improving instruction is really big, and that is um, how I understand and what I believe about that social cultural learning does promote effective learning when you have these pieces in place. Here are my references. With that being said, thank you for watching. Have a great day.